As Theresa May loses battle at Britain, West Coast oligarchs sue for peace. The forced resignation of British Prime Minister and Hitler's daughter, Theresa May, marked a decisive turning point in the battle for the planet Earth, multiple sources agree. Already, her resignation has forced high-tech oligarchs Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk to seek peace negotiations with the White Dragon Society, WDS, according to P2 Freemason sources. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has spent the Memorial Day weekend in Japan, in part to avoid assassination as moves begin to end the long political deadlock in Washington, D.C., Pentagon and Japanese right-wing sources say. As many of us are aware, U.S. politics have been stuck in an endlessly repeating loop for 2 years, with hysterical Democrats using control of corporate media and every legal tool possible to remove Trump, while Trump endlessly tweets witch hunt. To understand why the resignation of May is crucial to breaking the political deadlock, we need to take a quick look at FISA Gate scandal. Basically, in 2016, the Rockefeller, Clinton oligarchs asked their Rothschild counterparts in the UK to circumvent US law in order to spy on Trump and concoct the Russiagate scandal to impeach him. May's resignation means the British Nazi Zionist allied oligarchs who fought against Trump are now all being purged from the British military, intelligence, political power structure, according to British royal family sources. This purge will be accompanied by a similar purge in the US according to Pentagon sources. Trump giving U.S. Attorney General William Barr power to declassify gives him clean hands to terminate Zionists when files are released about 9/11, 3/11 Fukushima, and other military intelligence, Pentagon sources promise. A foretaste of the source of files that are about to be released came with this leak from Holland of video and photographs taken immediately after Malaysian Air Flight 370/17 was shut down over the Ukraine. This film has been made available for download until the 1st June, but be warned that it contains graphic, stomach-churning images of mangled corpses. The whistleblower who sent the file noted that the victims of Flight 17 had invalid Dutch passports belonging to people who boarded Flight 370. Also, many of the bodies were decomposed, wearing winter clothes for a summer flight or else naked and had no blood. The information contained on the flight black boxes has never been made public by the English who received them, the source notes. British MI6 sources say, both the current and former Prime Minister colluded to pervert the course of emancipation of Great Britain, and as always, we found out, so they had to go. Now that they have been removed from power, the release of information from the Flight 370/16 black boxes is forthcoming, and the sources add. Also, former U.S. President Barack Obama is testifying now about the use of Flight 370/17 for nuclear blackmail against world leaders, CIA sources note. There are many signs the Khazarian mafia is not taking these imminent disclosures well. For one thing, CNN headlined an article about Trump's visit to Japan with a photo of John F. Kennedy exiting a plane on the day of his assassination. We also were treated to the spectacle of Rep. Jerry Nadler, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, which ran various congressional investigations against the president, passing out at a press conference. Meanwhile, an obviously highly stressed House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called for an intervention against Trump. If the U.S. military police do not round up these criminals after such blatant threats against a sitting president, they are guilty of dereliction of duty. In any case, the Zionist-ruled state of Israel is also under siege. Mass murdering war criminal Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been unable to form a government after his recent attempt to steal the election there. Israel is surrounded by missiles, S-400s, tsunami nukes, and may have to give up the Golan Heights, Pentagon sources note. Meanwhile, the boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS campaign against Israel escalates with Trump forcing Israel to abandon Chinese projects, while Siemens, Bombardier, Hitachi, Macquarie, Alstom, and the Greek Consortium all withdrew from the Jerusalem Light Rail project, the sources note. The EU is also reviewing its ties with the Zionist Israeli Bank Leumi, they note. Furthermore, Israeli crimes are stoking anti-Semitism to the extent that Germany is warning Jews not to wear their skull caps, the sources note. The true cause of war is being discussed among Pentagon insiders, perhaps including Army Chief of Staff Mark Milley, already designated to become the next chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, comments Robert Davis Daly, former Marine and CIA officer. Both the president and the best of the senior leaders understand that being the Zionist tool for the Middle East has cost the USA not just $7 trillion, but 75,000 amputees, 250,000 or more confirmed PTSD cases, tens of thousands of rapes, male as well as female, and a virtual $1 trillion crime wave as contractors have leveraged easy money to cheat the military and taxpayer, he says. Internationally, the Zionist neocon attempt to force regime change on Venezuela and steal that country's oil has publicly been declared a failure. Also, attempts to start a war with Iran have failed. And instead, the US government is now working on a comprehensive Middle East peace deal with Iran and Saudi Arabia, CIA sources note. In Indonesia, a Zionist attempt to overturn the re-election of President Joko Widodo resulted in 7 deaths, 250 injuries and 400 arrests before fizzling out. In Europe, French Euro-skeptic Marine Le Pen defeated Rothschild slave Emmanuel Macron in EU parliamentary elections. The American and British leaders who will be in France to celebrate the 75th anniversary of D-Day on June 6 look as if they are set to once again liberate France from German conquerors. These events are all very promising and show that things are indeed coming to a head, but, and there's a big but, we need to see the people behind these international criminal acts in handcuffs facing a public war crimes tribunal before we can actually believe real change is imminent. There are also signs that many oligarchs are far from defeated. Patrick Wood from Technocracy.news has uncovered a Rockefeller scheme to launder $6 trillion created by fiat money stock market inflation into 8,700 tax-free opportunity zones in the US. He notes that this initiative was started by Sean Parker, who co-founded Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg. Wood does not appear to know that Zuckerberg is David Rockefeller's grandson. In any case, as mentioned earlier, last week Jeff Bezos of Amazon, Elon Musk of Tesla, and Zuckerberg all contacted the WDS via the P2 Freemason launch in Italy to propose a peace agreement, P2 sources say. The three agreed that some sort of world federation needs to be set up and humanity needs to be allowed to expand out into the universe, the sources say. They also agreed that whoever is blocking human progress needs to be dealt with. The P2 identify Israel, Netanyahu, as one of the enemies who needs to be flushed out and dealt with. The others are die-hard Zionist fanatics who still think they're going to artificially create the biblical end times, they say. The other big issue that needs to be settled is the US-China trade war. Pentagon sources think that Trump has wisely used the trade war to let China hammer US companies like Apple, Google, Boeing, and Nike, forcing them to move back to home MAGA while creating an alternative global supply chain. However, the Americans need to study their own recent history. Back in the late 1980s, they forced Japan to increase the value of yen by over 100%, in effect creating massive tariffs in order to eliminate the US-Japan trade deficit. The only result was that Japanese manufacturing moved to the rest of Asia and the US trade deficit kept rising. Because Japan is occupied by the US military, the Japanese were forced to keep buying US government bonds and thus keep the US afloat. This is not the case with China. Also, even if manufacturing should move from China to places like Vietnam, Asia as a whole will maintain a huge surplus relative to the United States. The only way for the US to end its trade deficit, as we keep repeating, is for it to give up the so-called US dollar and issue its own low-priced sovereign currency. While Asia as a whole doesn't want to replace US imperialism with Chinese imperialism, they will not continue to buy US treasuries to support constant US war-mongering. The ancient secret societies transcend China and promised to keep up the fight against the Zionists until the fanatical nightmare it permanently ended. Once this is done, the ancient and the rest of the world would be happy to support the US military-industrial complex as it transforms itself from a Zionist imperialist tool into a beginning planetary protection and space exploration force.